It was one of those rainy afternoons where the world outside seemed to mirror the heaviness in her heart, each drop sliding down the cafe window like unspoken tears. She sat in her wheelchair by the corner table, her cream-colored dress pooling softly around her legs that no longer carried her. In her lap rested a small birthday cake with flickering candles, the only companions to her solitude. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful CEO in the city, but power, wealth, and influence could not buy the one thing she longed for: someone to share her special day with. The friends who once crowded her life had drifted away after the accident, and though her father loved her dearly, he was buried under endless board meetings and responsibilities. So here she was, 21 years old, watching the wax melt down like a hope, preparing to blow out candles in silence. The cafe door creaked open, letting in the scent of rain, soaked streets, and in walked a man with tired eyes and shoulders heavy from life's burdens. Beside him was a little girl, no more than 5, clutching a worn pink flower toy in her tiny hands. They shook off the drizzle, scanning for an empty table, but the cafe was full. The man's gaze lingered on the girl by the window with the cake, her blonde hair cascading in waves, her loneliness so palpable that even a stranger could feel it. His daughter tugged at his hand, whispering, "Daddy, she looks sad." He knelt to her level, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face, and she whispered again, "Can we sit with her?" The man hesitated. He knew who she was. Everyone in the city did. The paralyzed daughter of the CEO, the girl who had once graced magazine covers with her smile before fate chained her to a chair. He wondered if approaching her would seem intrusive. Yet, something inside told him this moment wasn't about social lines or status. It was about kindness. So, gathering courage, he walked over slowly. His voice was gentle but uncertain as he asked, "Can we join you?" She looked up, startled, her blue eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, she wanted to decline, to retreat into the safety of isolation. But then her gaze shifted to the little girl beside him. The child held out the toy flower with innocent sincerity and said, "Happy birthday." Something cracked open in her heart, something she thought had been buried with the life she lost. She blinked back tears and gave a small nod. "Yes," she whispered, "please." The man pulled out a chair and helped his daughter climb onto it, sitting down across from the wheelchair. For the first time that day, the table didn't feel empty. The candles flickered brighter as if sensing the shift in energy. The little girl leaned forward. "Why?" "Died at the cake. Can I help you blow them out?" she asked with childlike eagerness. The young woman laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months, and nodded. Together, the two leaned forward, inhaled deeply, and with one joyful puff, the flames went out, leaving trails of smoke that curled like whispers of wishes rising to heaven. "Did you make a wish?" the little girl asked. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I think it already came true." The father watched silently, struck by the warmth returning to her eyes. He had come in only searching for a seat, but somehow he and his daughter had walked into a moment that mattered. They talked for hours. She learned his name, learned that he was a single father who worked 2 jobs to provide for his daughter, that he carried both exhaustion and love in equal measure. He learned about her accident, about how the world seemed to move on without her while she stayed behind. As rain kept tapping against the glass, laughter began to replace the silence. The little girl smeared frosting on her nose, making them all laugh harder, and for the first time in years, the young woman felt like she wasn't defined by her wheelchair, by her loss, or even by her father's empire. She was simply herself, a young woman sharing cake with new friends. The father noticed how she held herself, fragile but also radiant, and something stirred in his chest, a quiet admiration for the way she was learning to live again. Hours passed unnoticed until the cafe lights dimmed slightly, signaling closing time. He stood, gently lifting his daughter into his arms as she clung to his shoulder, half asleep. "Thank you," the young woman said, her voice trembling with sincerity. "You turned what would have been the loneliest birthday into the most meaningful one." He smiled softly, adjusting the little girl in his arms. "Sometimes all it takes is asking if we can join," he replied. As they left, she looked back at the empty cake plate, the melted candles, and the warmth still lingering in the air. For the first time in a long time, She believed her life wasn't over, it was just beginning again. Her father's wealth could fill rooms, but it was the kindness of a stranger and the innocence of a child that filled her heart. She closed her eyes and let the memory settle deep inside, a promise that even in the darkest storms, there are moments of light if we're brave enough to let them in. And that night, as she lay in her room, she whispered into the quiet, "Happy birthday" to me. But this time it wasn't lonely, it was hopeful, because she knew now that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in the simple words of a single dad asking, "Can we join you?" And the echo of a child's laughter, wrapping itself around your broken places until they begin to mend. Life has a way of surprising us in the most unexpected places, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the turning point in someone else's story. Imagine a young woman who once had the world at her feet, the daughter of a powerful CEO, a girl who had lived in the brightness of luxury, in the spotlight of admiration, until one tragic accident changed everything, confining her to a wheelchair and reshaping her future forever. Her birthdays, once filled with people, music, and endless gifts, had become lonely reminders of everything she had lost. So on one rainy afternoon, she found herself in a little café, dressed in a soft cream-colored gown, sitting by the window where raindrops danced on the glass, a small birthday cake with flickering candles in her lap. No friends, no family at her side, just silence and memories. She closed her eyes and wondered if she should blow out the candles at all. After all, what was the point of making wishes when life seemed to have already taken hers away outside? The world moved on, yellow taxis passing by, strangers hurrying through puddled streets, each person carrying their own story, their own pain, their own joy, yet none pausing long enough to notice the girl who sat so still by the window. It was then that the cafe door opened, and with it, a gust of damp air and the sound of rain dripping from rooftops. In walked a man, tall, with tired eyes that told of long nights and a life heavy with responsibility. By his side clutched a little girl, her floral dress sprinkled with raindrops, her small hands gripping a worn pink toy flower. They looked around for an empty table but found none. The cafe was crowded, and yet it wasn't the lack of seating that caught their attention. It was the sight of the lonely young woman with the birthday cake. The child tugged at her father's sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, she looks sad. Can we sit with her?" The man looked uncertain. After all, he knew who she was. Everyone in the city did. She was the CEO daughter, once the golden girl of society, and now the girl fate had struck down. But the innocence in his daughter's eyes made him pause. Perhaps, he thought, this wasn't about who she was, but about what she needed. So with a hesitant smile, he walked closer and gently asked, "Can we join you?" The young woman lifted her gaze, startled at first, her eyes guarded from too many days of pity and silence. But when she saw the little girl clutching the toy flower and offering it to her with a simple, "Happy birthday," her heart softened. It had been so long since anyone other than her father had spoken those words. Her lips trembled, and she whispered back, "Yes, please sit." The man pulled out a chair for his daughter and himself, and suddenly the table no longer felt like an island of loneliness. The little girl leaned forward, wide-eyed at the cake. "May I help you blow out the candles?" she asked. The young woman laughed, a soft sound she hadn't heard from her own lips in months. Together they leaned forward, two souls of different worlds, and blew the candles out, the smoke curling like tiny prayers into the air. "Did you make a wish?" the child asked again, and the young woman, with tears glistening in her eyes, whispered, "I think it already came true." What followed was hours of unexpected connection. They talked and laughed, the father sharing stories of his struggle as a single parent, of working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, of the challenges and the joys of raising his daughter alone. She listened, fascinated, realizing how much strength it took to keep going. In return, she opened her heart, telling him about her accident, about how quickly people she thought were friends had disappeared, about the hollow silence of her days, about her father's wealth that could buy anything except true companionship. The little girl listened too, occasionally chiming in with innocent comments that drew laughter from both adults. And for the first time in years, the young woman felt like she wasn't defined by her wheelchair. She wasn't the pitied daughter of a billionaire. She was just a girl, sharing cake with new friends on a rainy day. The rain outside fell harder, but inside the warmth grew. The little girl smeared frosting on her nose, making them all burst into laughter. And in that laughter, young woman felt something healing within her, a belief she had thought she lost, that she could still belong, that joy could still find her. Time slipped away unnoticed until the cafe's lights dimmed slightly. A gentle reminder that closing time was near. The father stood, lifting his sleeping daughter into his arms, adjusting her so she could rest her head on his shoulder. The young woman looked at them, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "You turned the loneliest birthday into the most meaningful one." He smiled, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Sometimes all it takes is asking if we can join you," he replied as they walked away. She stared at the empty plate where the cake once sat, at the flickering memory of candles and laughter that still lingered in the air. For the first time in years, she felt like her story wasn't over, that perhaps it was just beginning again. Later that night, alone in her room, she replayed the afternoon in her mind, the kindness of a stranger, the innocence of a child, the warmth of shared laughter, and as she whispered into the quiet, "Happy birthday to me," she realized it no longer felt empty, because in that moment she understood that healing doesn't always come from grand miracles. Sometimes it comes from a single dad asking, "Can we join you?" and from a little girl's smile that makes the world feel new again.